Ladies and gentlemen, let's Gaming into the video. We're going to be continuing our series of quick tech tips where I endeavour to impart wisdom upon you. This wisdom could be anything from creativity related or productivity related tips for Windows, all the way to tips to get the most out of your games console, hardware, and so much more besides. In this video I'm going to be focusing once again on productivity tips. These are small little tweaks you may be able to make in your own Windows-based workflow, or even just to tweak the system to get a little bit more out of it. And as usual, I try to keep the video as short and concise as possible. So with that said, I want to go into a few lesser known things first, and then kind of glaze over some tips that a lot of folks know but you may have forgotten, or maybe you're not too familiar with if you're just getting more into the PC side of gaming. So first things first, I want to show you one related to the taskbar. First of all, if you right click, you've got an awful lot of options. You can lock the taskbar, and go to Task Manager, which is the same as basically Control-Alt-Delete, and it's kind of handy if you just want to do something real quick. Show the desktop, that's actually really handy if you've got a whole bunch of windows open, although you can just press Windows M and it will do the same thing. I repeat, Windows Mother, so Windows M, and you can press Windows Shift M to restore those. But here's one that's less familiar to you. You've got also toolbars. So let's say, for example, we mouse over toolbars, click on desktop. You'll notice this little sucker pops up over here, and if you double click on it, you've got all of the different options that you would have on your desktop. I don't have that much at the moment, and then you can simply double click to get those back to normal. I'm going to disable that toolbar because it's not something I particularly care about. Similarly, if you've got a modern version of Windows, you can actually right click on the start menu button, and then you can access a whole bunch of commands. I believe I've shown this one before, but it bears repeating. You've got things such as being able to shut down, run, which is obviously kind of a handy command, control panel, task manager, all of which are quite handy to access on a frequent basis. Now, I think this one is probably one that many of you are aware of, but if you're unfamiliar with it, it's kind of handy. So I'm just going to press Windows plus R just to access the run command, and then type in msconfig, click on OK, and it will pop up with the General tab. We're not interested in the General tab, we're going to mosey on over. You've got the option to change your boot menu and so on, but we're not too fussed about that at the moment. But if you click on services, you can go ahead and disable or enable services based on your personal requirements, and you can actually filter them as well simply by clicking on, for example, status, and then you've got all the options. This is really handy if you want to improve the performance of your machine, maybe disable certain services loading. It can also be kind of handy for, I guess, checking for spyware. Like if there's a really dodgy sounding service, you can go in there and start doing some googling to see what it does. And another handy thing is if you click on hide all Microsoft services, most of the really imperative services that make your system run will be hidden, so you can't accidentally disable something that's going to cause your machine to not boot. Similarly, you've also got the options for startup. These are essentially programs which you may install and then will load as Windows gets to the desktop. Once again, these are kind of handy to remove if you don't need them on a frequent basis, or you just want that extra performance. So you can also sort it by startup impact, which is pretty obvious how long it takes or how much of an impact it has on your machine to boot. For example, right here, I've disabled uTorrent because I basically never use it, although it is kind of handy occasionally, but and Origin, well, yeah, it has a high impact, but to be honest with you, I just leave that enabled because it doesn't make too much of a big difference on my SSD, but there are a whole bunch of other stuff as well which I could enable or disable based upon my desire, and you simply right click and disable it. And then you can also open file location, which will take you to the process's location where it's installed, so you can get a better idea of what it's actually doing if you're unfamiliar once again with the application in question. I'm going to close all of those, and now we're going to switch over to something that's a little more frequent you're possibly going to utilize, and that would be personalize. Now, there is actually quite a few options here. If you click on start, you can go ahead and change some of the start menu behaviors on Windows 10. For example, use full screen start when in desktop. You know that whole full screen Windows start menu display. You could go ahead and switch that off so it's something more akin to that, or you can have the full screen. It's totally up to you. Personally, I prefer it like that. I'm going to click out of that, and I'm going to click on display settings. It's just a handy way to get to the settings/system. Quite nice if you want to change the size of the text, by the way, if you're running on a higher DPI display, but for our purposes I'm just going to leave that alone. But I do want to show you under multitasking. Now, personally, I don't know why you'd ever disable this, because I actually really like this functionality of Windows, but some people dislike it. If you're using a touch-based system, I can see how it would be a pain in the buttocks, or if you're just someone who just wants the very simple, basic version of Windows and you don't like any of this modern tomfoolery, you can simply click off snap, which will disable all of that stuff. And you know how Windows snaps to the side? Yeah, that no longer does that. I don't quite know why you'd ever want to do that. Personally, I really like to do this, so you can go ahead and do things like that, but I'm aware some people may not like that, so I'm just offering it as an alternative, I guess you could say. And that's it. As I said, just a quick set of tips which you may or may not know, which, you know, I'm trying to get through the basic ones first before we start going into the more complex ones, where we start talking about scripting and we start talking about how best to reinstall graphics drivers and get the most out of your GPU, that type of stuff. But I figured like this, if we get all on the same page and there's a nice kind of, you know, not necessarily beginner tips, but ones that you may not be too familiar with, I figure it's good. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you're still with me, I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.